ADX Florence meals exposed, the harshest menu behind bars. The mystery on the meal tray. The steel door creaks open. A correctional officer slides a tray through the slot. On it, a lump of meat so gray it looks like cement, a scoop of beans that smell sour, and a slice of bread so hard it could break a tooth. The inmate stares at the tray. He knows this isn't just food. This is control. He picks up the bread, bangs it against the wall. Thud. It doesn't even bend. In ADX Florence, America's most feared Supermax prison, meals are not just about survival. They are weapons. Meals that can crush the spirit of men locked inside for 23 hours a day. But on one shocking day, something on the tray wasn't just disgusting. It was dangerous. And when an inmate took a bite, he collapsed. What was hidden inside that meal? And how many other prisoners had already been served the same thing? The daily menu of misery. Every meal at ADX Florence begins the same way. A metal slot opens. A tray slides in. And silence follows. No cafeteria. No choices. No line of inmates holding trays like in regular prisons. Here, the food is delivered straight to the cell, like feeding a dangerous animal. Breakfast is usually plain. A small cereal box, powdered milk, maybe a boiled egg. By noon, lunch shows up, lukewarm beans, watery soup, maybe a slice of bologna stuck between stale bread. And dinner? That's where inmates say the real punishment begins. Rubbery meat, overcooked vegetables, and mystery casseroles that no one can identify. Some say it's turkey. Others swear it's leftovers from days before, just mashed together. The meals aren't about taste, they're about control. And slowly, day by day, they wear inmates down. One prisoner wrote in a smuggled letter, "It's not the solitary that breaks you, it's the food. You stop feeling human. You feel like trash." But then, something worse happened. A tray arrived one night, and by the next morning, an inmate was found unconscious in his cell, his lips blue, his body shaking. The guards rushed in, dragging him out on a stretcher. The other prisoners banged on their doors, shouting, "What's in the food?" And that's when the whispers began. That maybe ADX Florence wasn't just starving men of taste. It might be poisoning them slowly. And the next chapter reveals what they discovered when they tested the food. The discovery on the tray. The rumors spread fast. Inmates began refusing their meals, sliding trays back out untouched. One inmate, known only as Henderson, decided to investigate. He wasn't a scientist. He wasn't even educated past the 10th grade. But inside ADX, desperation makes men resourceful. He scraped parts of his food into an empty milk carton, sealed it, and passed it along the prison grapevine. That carton eventually reached a lawyer on the outside. Weeks later, the results came back. Traces of cleaning chemicals. Traces of something that should never be in food. The news hit the prison like an earthquake. Guards denied everything. The warden insisted the meals were safe, balanced, and approved by federal guidelines. But inside the cells, no one believed it. Inmates whispered through the cracks in the doors, tapping messages on the pipes. "They're testing us. They want to break us. If the food doesn't kill you, it will make you lose your mind." For a brief time, some prisoners tried to survive on commissary snacks, ramen, cookies, peanut butter. But not everyone had money. And when you have nothing left, you're forced back to the tray. That's when the anger exploded. One inmate snapped. When his dinner arrived, a pile of rubbery meat with gray gravy, he hurled the tray back at the guard. The food splattered across the corridor wall. The guard hit the alarm. Sirens wailed. Red lights flashed. Within seconds, a team of armored officers stormed down the hall, shields up, ready to crush him. The sound of boots and metal echoed through the prison. The inmate was dragged out screaming, "You're feeding us poison." And just like that, the entire prison went silent. No one knew what would happen next. But every inmate understood one thing. The food wasn't just punishment anymore. It was war. And in the next chapter, we'll see how this food war turned ADX into a boiling pressure cooker, where even the smallest bite could spark chaos. The food war begins. The silence didn't last. 2 nights after the inmate was dragged away, something happened that shook the entire block. The dinner trays arrived. But this time, instead of eating, dozens of prisoners shoved their trays back through the slots. Slam, slam, slam. The sound of metal trays clanging on the floor echoed like gunfire through the corridor. It was the first food strike inside ADX Florence. At first, it was calm. Inmates simply refused to eat. They tapped messages across the pipes, organizing cell by cell, voice by voice. For once, men who never trusted each other, gang leaders, loners, terrorists, even mob bosses, were united. They weren't demanding better meals. They were demanding safe meals. But ADX doesn't bend. The warden ordered the trays to keep coming. Same portions, same gray meat, same stale bread. Days passed. Some men grew weak. Some gave up and ate. Others held out, their ribs showing, their voices hoarse. And then came the breaking point. A guard slid a tray into cell 213. Inside was a plastic cup of orange juice. The inmate, a man called Rodriguez, picked it up, sniffed it, and froze. The smell was sharp. Too sharp. He poured it onto the floor, and the liquid began to bubble, eating into the concrete. Rodriguez screamed, banging on his door. "They're trying to kill us." The entire tier erupted. Prisoners slammed fists against steel doors, shouting, howling like wolves in a cage. Guards rushed in with shields and gas masks. The air filled with pepper spray. In seconds, the block turned into chaos. Men coughing, choking, smashing their fists bloody against the bars. And yet, through the smoke, through the violence, through the confusion, one question haunted every prisoner. If the food was being poisoned, who was behind it? Secrets from the kitchen. For years, inmates thought the food came straight from a federal supplier, safe and controlled. But the truth about the ADX kitchen was darker. Unlike other prisons, most meals here are prepared by inmates themselves, low-risk prisoners brought in from nearby facilities. Under heavy guard, they cook, clean, and pack the trays that feed America's most dangerous men. At first glance, it looks normal. Giant pots of beans, boiling vats of soup, meat patties stacked in trays. But behind the scenes, mistakes happen. And sometimes, mistakes aren't mistakes. A former kitchen worker later confessed. You could slip something in without anyone knowing. Salt, bleach, soap, it all looked the same in those bags. That revelation shook lawyers and families outside the prison. If inmates in the kitchen had access to the meals, then the food itself could become a weapon. Inside, prisoners began trading stories of strange tastes, sour aftertastes, meals that left them sick for days. Some claimed it was intentional sabotage, kitchen workers targeting rivals locked deep inside the Supermax. Others believed the guards knew and turned a blind eye. For weeks, nothing major happened. Just whispers, paranoia, and hunger. Then came one night when it all exploded. A tray arrived at cell 302. The inmate lifted the lid and froze. Crawling inside the mashed potatoes, alive, were cockroaches. The man hurled the tray against the wall, screaming at the top of his lungs. His cries carried down the tier until every prisoner was pounding on their doors, shouting in rage. Guards swarmed the corridor. Lights flashed. Alarms blared. The food strike was no longer quiet. It had turned into open rebellion. And in that moment, one terrifying truth became clear. If the meals couldn't be trusted, then survival at ADX Florence was no longer just about enduring isolation. It was about fighting back against the very thing meant to keep them alive. Hunger as a weapon. The cockroach incident spread like wildfire through the prison. If the food itself couldn't be trusted, then there was only one weapon left: hunger. Prisoners began rejecting their trays, one by one. Some slid them back out untouched. Others left them to rot in the corner of their cells, the smell of spoiled beans filling the air. It was no longer about taste. It was about control. By starving themselves, the inmates were sending a message. We would rather die than eat what you feed us. For a time, the halls of ADX grew eerily quiet. Instead of the clatter of trays, there was silence. Instead of chewing, men lay weak on their bunks, their stomachs growling in unison like a haunting drumbeat. The guards watched carefully. They knew hunger strikes could spread like fire. But in ADX Florence, force feeding is always an option. And that's exactly what happened next. One by one, prisoners were dragged from their cells, shackled hand and foot. They were strapped into chairs, their heads held still, their arms pinned tight. A rubber tube was forced down their noses, pumping a chalky liquid meal into their stomachs. The process was brutal. Many gagged. Some vomited. But the guards didn't stop. They called it keeping inmates alive. The prisoners called it torture. And then, one night, something went horribly wrong. An inmate named Davis, already weak from weeks of refusing food, was strapped in for force feeding. But this time, the tube pierced the wrong way, sliding into his lungs instead of his stomach. Davis began to choke. His eyes bulged, his chest heaved, and within seconds, he collapsed in the chair, unable to breathe. The guards scrambled, pulling the tube, shouting for medical help. But by the time a doctor arrived, Davis's body had gone still. The entire tier went wild, banging, shouting, screaming through the walls. They killed him. And once again, ADX Florence was plunged into chaos. Retaliation in the shadows. Davis's death sent a shockwave through the prison. Word traveled fast, through toilet pipes, through vent taps, through whispered codes between cells. ADX Florence had always been about control. But now, the inmates wanted payback. It started small. Prisoners stopped flushing their toilets, letting the stench rise and spread through the block. Others smeared food across the walls, spelling out messages in beans and ketchup. To the guards, it looked like madness. But to the men inside, it was rebellion. Soon, the whispers turned into plans. If the prison used food as a weapon, then the inmates would weaponize it too. One inmate, known only as King, found a way to hoard packets of powdered milk and stale bread. He mixed them with water from the sink, letting the mixture rot for days. By the time the guards discovered it, the concoction had turned into a foul, bubbling sludge. He hurled it at an officer during tray delivery, splattering the guard from head to toe. That single act of defiance lit the fuse. Suddenly, trays weren't just being refused. They were being turned into weapons. Soup was thrown like acid. Bread was soaked in urine and shoved back through the slot. Every meal became a battleground. The guards retaliated with lockdowns, pepper spray, and shock shields. But even with all the power in their hands, they couldn't stop the sense of unity building among the prisoners. Then came the most chilling moment of all. During an inspection of the kitchen, staff found something hidden inside one of the massive food storage bins. Wrapped in plastic, buried beneath a mountain of dried beans, was a sharpened piece of metal. A homemade shank. It meant only one thing. The inmates weren't just fighting with food anymore. They were preparing for something far deadlier. And ADX Florence was about to explode. The kitchen revolt. The shank hidden in the bean bin changed everything. For the first time, guards realized that the fight over food wasn't just noise, or hunger strikes, or trays being thrown. The kitchen itself had become a battlefield. Inmates knew that whoever controlled the food controlled survival. The revolt began quietly. Kitchen workers, low-security inmates brought in from outside, started messing up orders on purpose. A little less meat on the tray. A little more salt. Bread left half-baked. Small acts of sabotage that whispered one message: we are not powerless. But then things escalated. One night, during meal prep, a worker slipped shards of plastic into a tray meant for the Supermax tier. The next day, when a prisoner bit down on his food, he nearly sliced his gums open. Blood dripped onto the concrete floor as he shouted through the door, "They're trying to cut us from the inside out." The entire block went on edge. If plastic could be hidden in the food, what else could be waiting on the tray? ADX guards doubled security in the kitchen. Every spoon, every ladle, every glove was counted and locked. But still, the sabotage continued. Meals arrived late. Meals arrived cold. Meals arrived with mystery flavors no one could identify. And then came the boiling point. A worker intentionally oversalted a giant vat of soup until it was inedible. When guards discovered it, the worker didn't deny. He stared straight at the officer and muttered one chilling line: "Better no food than poison food." That was the spark. The guards dragged him out, beating him bloody in front of the others. But it was too late. The message had already spread through ADX. The kitchen wasn't just failing. The kitchen had turned into a weapon of war. And the next time, the sabotage wouldn't just ruin a meal. It would nearly take a life. The meal that almost killed. It was a cold evening inside ADX Florence. The block was silent, the only sounds the hum of the lights and the faint rattle of chains. Then came the clang of metal as dinner trays slid through the slots. One inmate, Carver, sat on his bunk staring at his tray. It looked normal: meat loaf, mashed potatoes, a slice of bread. But when he took the first bite, his face twisted in pain. He spit it out instantly. His tongue burned, his throat tightened, his stomach cramped. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Carver collapsed on the floor, gasping for air. His cellmates on the tiers screamed through the doors. "Call medical. He's dying in there." Guards rushed in, dragging him out on a stretcher. His lips were swollen, his skin pale. Some inmates swore they smelled bleach in the food. Others claimed it was laced with cleaning powder. But whether it was an accident, or something far more sinister, one fact was clear. The meals were no longer just miserable. They were dangerous. The next day, Carver was gone. Some said he survived. Others believed he didn't. ADX never gave an answer. The silence from the prison only fueled the fire. Inmates began smashing their trays against the walls, their shouts echoing down the corridors. "We won't eat. We won't die like animals." The guards fought back with pepper spray and lockdowns, but the damage was already done. The food had crossed a line. And in that moment, the question haunting every man behind bars became louder than ever. If ADX Florence could serve a meal that almost killed one of them, what would come next? The lockdown aftermath. After Carver's collapse, ADX Florence went into full emergency mode. The warden ordered a prison-wide lockdown. Steel doors slammed shut. Hall lights dimmed. The sound of chains echoed as guards marched up and down the tiers. For the inmates, time froze. No yard time. No showers. No commissary. The only thing that still came through the slot was food. And now, every tray was a gamble. Some men refused to touch them. Others picked apart every bite like detectives, sniffing, poking, testing with their tongues before swallowing. But hunger is stronger than fear. Soon, many had no choice but to eat. In the calm silence of lockdown, tension simmered. Prisoners whispered through vents, trading rumors. "They're testing chemicals on us. This is punishment for the strike." Carver was a warning. Then came the retaliation. On the fourth night of lockdown, as guards delivered dinner, the tier exploded. Trays flew back out like missiles, meat, beans, and bread splattering across the walls. Inmates roared, banging on steel, shaking the doors so hard the entire block trembled. The guards fought back with flashbang grenades. The blasts echoed like thunder inside the concrete tombs, filling the air with smoke and ringing ears. But instead of silencing the men, the chaos only fueled their rage. From behind the doors, voices rose together in a single chant. "No more poison! No more poison!" The lockdown wasn't breaking them. It was uniting them. And deep inside the prison walls, one thing was becoming terrifyingly clear. If the food war didn't end soon, the next step would not be protest. It would be blood. Blood in the kitchen. The lockdown dragged on, and the prison was boiling like a pressure cooker. Every tray felt like a test, every bite like a trap. Then one day, it wasn't just the prisoners who snapped. It was the kitchen. A low-security inmate assigned to food prep, his name never revealed, had been whispering to others for weeks. "They're feeding poison. If we don't stop this, someone else will die." No one took him seriously. Until the day he acted. During dinner prep, he grabbed a kitchen knife hidden under his apron. When a guard shouted for him to hurry, he spun around and plunged the blade forward. The room erupted in screams. Pots toppled. Soup spilled across the floor. Other workers froze, too shocked to move as the guard went down, clutching his side, blood spreading across his uniform. Alarms shrieked through the prison. Within seconds, officers stormed the kitchen, batons swinging, shields raised. The worker was tackled, beaten, and dragged away in chains, his face swollen and bloody. But the damage was done. Word of the stabbing shot through ADX faster than any tray ever could. Prisoners slammed on their doors, howling with laughter, cheering, shouting. The kitchen fought back. Blood for blood. For the first time, the food war had spilled real blood. And the message was clear. If even the kitchen workers were turning violent, then ADX Florence was on the edge of something much bigger. And as night fell over the prison, every man inside wondered the same thing. What happens when the next tray comes through the slot? The tray of fire. It began like any other night. The steel doors clanged. The slots opened. The dinner trays slid through. But this time, the food wasn't touched. Inmates had been hoarding scraps for weeks, saving bread crusts, packets of sugar, bits of fruit from commissary. All of it had been fermented in hidden bottles, turning into a sour, flammable brew. And on that night, they decided to strike back. One inmate tore his bedsheet into strips, dipped it into the foul liquid, and wrapped it tight around a broken food tray. When the guards walked past, he lit it with a contraband spark. The flame shot up instantly. With a roar, he shoved the burning tray through the slot. It hit the corridor floor and exploded into fire. Alarms blared. Sprinklers rained down. Guards shouted orders over the chaos. But the blaze wasn't the real danger. The real danger was the chain reaction. Dozens of prisoners followed suit, stuffing trays with burning rags, hurling flaming scraps into the hallways. The entire tier lit up in a storm of fire and smoke, a fiery rebellion born from the very thing meant to sustain life. From behind the doors, voices thundered as one. No more poison. No more chains. The guards stormed in with extinguishers, choking on smoke, slipping on puddles. But by then, the message was clear. The food war had reached its breaking point. ADX Florence wasn't just feeding prisoners anymore. It was feeding revolt. And as the flames died down, one question hung heavy over the Supermax. What would the prison do next to crush the rebellion? The warden's counterstrike. The fire in the corridor sent shockwaves all the way to the top. The warden of ADX Florence had seen riots before, but never like this. Meals were supposed to be control. Now they had become rebellion. The order came down fast. Shut it all down. The next morning, the inmates waited for their trays. But nothing came. No slot opened. No clang of metal. No smell of food. Instead, the loudspeakers crackled to life with a cold announcement. Food service suspended. Emergency rations only. Within hours, every cell received a single brown paper bag. Inside, a cold bologna sandwich, a carton of milk, and a dry cookie. No hot meals. No variety. Just the same bag 3 times a day. For some inmates, it was torture. The bread crumbled like dust. The meat sweated in plastic wrap. The milk soured quickly in the hot cells. But worse than the taste was the message. The warden had stripped food of all comfort. It was no longer a weapon. It was punishment. Days turned into weeks. Men grew thinner. Fights broke out over commissary scraps. Some begged for the return of the trays, even the mystery meat, even the rubbery casseroles. But the silence from the kitchen remained. Then one night the counterstrike went further. During a routine cell check, guards stormed into a tier carrying clear plastic bags. Inside each bag was a pale, chalky powder. One officer shouted down the block. "From now on, this is your meal." It was nutritional powder, a tasteless, liquid replacement, mixed with water and shoved through the slot in bottles. No chewing. No flavor. No humanity. The prisoners screamed in fury, banging on the doors until their fists bled. But the warden's voice echoed cold and final. You wanted war over food, now food is gone. And in that moment, the men of ADX realized the fight wasn't just about poison, or hunger, or control. It was about survival itself. Breaking point. The powder meals broke the men faster than chains ever could. Day after day, they choked down the chalky liquid. No texture. No warmth. No sense of being human. Some refused it altogether, letting the bottles pile up in the corners of their cells. Their bodies weakened. Their skin clung to bone. The smell of sickness spread through the block. But inside ADX Florence, weakness doesn't always mean silence. It means desperation. And desperation is dangerous. One night, the pounding started again. It was faint at first, just a single inmate banging his bottle against the steel door. Then another joined in. Then another. Within minutes, the entire tier thundered like a war drum, hundreds of bottles smashing in unison. The guards rushed in, shields up, pepper spray in hand. But they weren't ready for what came next. From cell to cell, inmates began hurling back the powder bottles, their contents mixed with urine, spit, and blood. The white liquid splattered across the walls, drenching officers as they ducked and cursed. One guard slipped, crashing hard to the floor. In that instant, an inmate shoved a sharpened piece of metal, hidden in the bottle, through the slot. The blade tore across the officer's leg. Blood poured out as alarms screamed. The prison exploded into chaos. Backup stormed the block, flashbangs rattled the cells, and men screamed through smoke-filled corridors. But even as guards regained control, one truth was clear. The powder hadn't broken the prisoners. It had pushed them past the edge. And now, with blood spilled once again, everyone in ADX knew. The next battle over food wouldn't end with a protest. It would end with lives lost. The deadly exchange. It happened during a routine dinner delivery. The corridor was quiet, just the scrape of trays sliding through the slots. Then, without warning, the silence was shattered. An inmate in cell 407 launched his tray back out. Only this time, it wasn't just food. Hidden beneath the gray meat was a jagged piece of glass, sharpened to a deadly point. As the guard bent to pick up the fallen tray, the weapon shot through the slot. The scream echoed down the hall. The officer staggered back, clutching his throat, blood spilling through his fingers. Alarms blared as guards rushed to drag him out, his boots smearing a crimson trail across the concrete. The block erupted. Prisoners howled, pounding their doors, shouting through the steel. One for Carver. One for Davis. To them, this wasn't murder. It was payback. In the chaos, guards fought to regain control. Pepper spray filled the air, flashbangs rattled the cells, and shields slammed against steel doors. But even as the block was locked down, the message couldn't be erased. For the first time, the food war had spilled official blood. A guard was dead. The warden's response was swift and brutal. Every inmate in the tier was stripped of commissary. Lights stayed on 24 hours a day. Cold meals only, powder and bread, nothing more. But punishing the prisoners only fed the rage. And deep inside those walls, the men began whispering of something darker. Not just throwing trays. Not just stabbing through the slot. A plan for an all-out kitchen takeover. The kitchen takeover. The whispers turned into a plan. If the trays were poisoned, if the powder was torture, then the only way to survive was to take control of the kitchen itself. It started with the low-security inmates assigned to kitchen duty. They were the weak link, the ones who had access to the food before it reached the Supermax tier. And one by one, they were approached through coded messages, smuggled notes, and threats whispered in the yard. The deal was simple. Do what we say, or you'll pay the price. Soon the meals changed. A little extra peanut butter in some bags. An extra slice of bread. Signals passed from kitchen workers to men inside. The kitchen was turning. But then came the day it all snapped. During lunch prep, a worker snapped a ladle in half and swung it like a blade at an officer. Other inmates followed, grabbing trays, pots, even boiling water as weapons. The kitchen erupted into chaos. Shouts, metal crashing, food flying through the air. For a brief moment, the prisoners had done the unthinkable. They had seized control of the food supply inside the world's most secure prison. But ADX Florence does not lose control for long. Within minutes, tactical teams stormed the kitchen. Flashbangs roared. Gas filled the air. When it was over, men lay bruised, shackled, dragged across the floor. The revolt had failed. The prison had crushed the uprising. But the message lingered. The food war wasn't just about hunger. It wasn't just about poison, or control, or survival. It was about power. And in ADX Florence, even a tray of beans could start a riot. The taste of control. ADX Florence was built to break men. Steel doors. Concrete walls. Endless silence. But in the end, it wasn't the chains that cut the deepest. It was the food. Meals that humiliated. Meals that sickened. Meals that turned into weapons. The prison thought food would control the inmates. But instead, food exposed the truth. That even in America's most secure prison, even in the harshest cells on earth, desperation finds a way to fight back. Because when survival itself is on the line, every tray, every crumb, every bite becomes more than food. It becomes war. This was ADX Florence, Meals Exposed.